Your family needs you, son.
On the next episode of Dutton Ranch.
Whole Jackson family's crooked. They ain't ranchers. They're thieves.
I need you ready for the hard parts when they come. Because they're coming.
One gun, one moment, one family's entire legacy hanging by a thread. What started as a murder that seemed impossible to solve just became impossible to hide, because someone finally decided that staying silent was no longer worth the cost. And when that gun lands in the hands of the law, it does not just threaten the man who pulled the trigger. It threatens everyone who spent years protecting him, including the one person who has been working non-stop to deliver justice the whole time. This is the moment where loyalty dies, where protection becomes betrayal, and where a single act of revenge destroys far more than anyone expected it to. There is a specific moment in every family story where everything that came before becomes completely irrelevant, where the careful structures you built to keep darkness hidden finally collapse under the weight of everything they were designed to bury. And on episode 9, that moment arrives in the form of a gun. Not just any gun, the weapon that took Wes's life and set this entire catastrophic chain of events into motion in the first place. But here is what makes this moment so genuinely devastating. It does not arrive in the hands of someone searching desperately for evidence. It does not surface through accident or discovery. It is handed over deliberately, consciously, by the one person in this entire family who had every single reason to keep it hidden. And that decision, that singular act of betrayal, represents something far more significant than just a man deciding to expose a murder. It represents the moment when years of unrecognized sacrifice finally reach their breaking point. Because to understand why Ween walks into Sheriff Wade's office with that gun in episode 9, you have to understand exactly what his life has been built on for years before that moment ever happens. His entire existence inside the Dutton family has been defined by one single purpose: protection. But not the kind of protection that gets celebrated in public or rewarded with recognition and status. This is the quiet protection that happens behind closed doors. The kind that requires you to make yourself smaller and smaller with every year that passes. The kind that demands you carry weight that was never yours to carry in the first place. For years, Ween has been the person who cleaned up messes that were not his responsibility to clean. He was the one who made problems disappear before they ever reached anyone important enough to actually solve them. While other members of this family slept peacefully at night, Ween was absorbing the actual cost of keeping their secrets intact. He took responsibility for things he did not do. He buried things that other people destroyed. He sacrificed his own needs, his own desires, his own future, in service of people who looked at that sacrifice and treated it like it was simply part of his job description. And the entire time he was doing all of this, carrying all of this weight, he believed something that most people would have stopped believing years earlier. He believed that it meant something. He believed that eventually, when the moment came to decide who actually deserved to lead this family forward, his decades of loyalty would matter more than blood alone would matter. That belief was not stupid. It was not naive in the way that people who have never sacrificed anything significant might call it naive. That belief was the only thing that made his life feel like it was building towards something real. It was the only way he could swallow years of being taken for granted without completely losing his mind. It was the story he told himself every single night to make sense of everything he was sacrificing. Then Bula proved him completely wrong. And she did it in front of an entire room of people. When the moment actually arrived to choose who would lead this family into its next chapter, she looked at Ween, the man who had given his entire adult life in service of this family, without ever once resorting to threats or violence to get what he deserved. And she looked at Rob Will, a man who threatened murder to get exactly what he wanted. A man who showed his true colors in front of his own mother. A man who behaved with such reckless disregard for anyone around him that he was willing to threaten violence against the very woman who just rejected him. And Bula chose Rob Will. She chose the violent man over the loyal man. She chose blood over years of dedicated service. She chose the man who had earned nothing but consequences over the man who had earned everything he ever asked for. That single decision did something that nobody watching this season fully anticipated when it actually happened. It did not just hurt Ween in the way that normal disappointment usually hurts people. It did not wound him in a way that time could eventually heal. Instead, it freed him completely. And here is why that matters so much for everything that happens next. The moment Bula chose Rob Will over him, every single reason that Ween ever had to keep protecting this family's secrets evaporated instantly. It disappeared completely. He was never protecting them purely out of loyalty to begin with. Even if he spent years telling himself that story, even if he made himself believe it was the only reason he was doing it, he was protecting them because he believed it was building towards something he genuinely deserved. He was protecting them because he thought his sacrifice would eventually be recognized. And once that belief shattered in front of everyone he knew, once he stood in that room and watched his entire life's work get rejected in favor of a man who had done absolutely nothing to earn leadership, the reason for his protection died completely. So now we arrive at the moment where Ween walks into Sheriff Wade's office, and he is carrying that gun with him. Think carefully about what kind of decision that actually represents. This is not a man lashing out emotionally in the immediate aftermath of public humiliation. This is not something he is doing in a moment of rage or grief or overwhelming anger. This is not impulsive or reactive in the way that emotions typically produce impulsive behavior. This is calculated. This is deliberate. This is the kind of decision that only comes from someone who has had time to sit with their devastation, time to process what just happened to them, and time to arrive at a clear-eyed conclusion about exactly what they want to do with that devastating realization. Ween understands completely what handing over that weapon means. He knows that it sets in motion a chain of events that cannot be reversed once it begins. He comprehends every consequence that follows from that single action. And he is doing it anyway. He is doing it with full and complete understanding of exactly what he is putting into motion. Because for the first time in his entire adult life, he has absolutely nothing left to protect by staying silent. He has nothing left to lose. He has been stripped of everything he ever believed he was working towards. So what could possibly stop him from finally speaking the truth? But here is where this situation becomes genuinely complicated in a way that most people celebrating Rob Will's potential downfall are completely overlooking right now. What happens when the gun reveals far more than anyone expected it to? Having a weapon is not the same thing as having a conviction. Having a gun is not the same thing as having justice. And that distinction, that crucial gap between possession and proof, is about to become the most important thing happening in this entire story. Sheriff Wade now possesses an actual murder weapon, a physical object that Ween handed over voluntarily, something that exists inside an official file with a documented chain of custody. A gun is not subtle. A gun is not something that can be quietly buried or conveniently overlooked the way a body can disappear down an abandoned mine shaft. But a gun by itself does not tell Sheriff Wade who pulled the trigger. A gun by itself does not prove that Rob Will committed this murder. A gun by itself does not provide the kind of forensic certainty that holds up under real scrutiny. Because the authorities would normally need the actual body of the victim to match the bullet to the gun. They would need Wes's remains to confirm cause of death with the kind of physical evidence that survives contact with a defense attorney or a skeptical judge. They would need something that connects the gun directly to the moment of death itself. And that something is completely missing. That something is gone, buried deliberately where it was never supposed to be found. Rip Wheeler removed that body himself. Rip, the man who has been working underneath Rob Will this entire season. Rip, the foreman who has supposedly been trying to solve this mystery and deliver justice for Wes. Rip is the person who disposed of the evidence that would transform Ween's gun from a suspicious object into something that actually proves guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. He took that body and he buried it down an abandoned mine shaft specifically engineered so that it would never be discovered by anyone searching for it. Which means the very evidence that would make this case unshakable, the very thing that would transform Sheriff Wade's suspicion into absolute proof, is missing entirely. And the person responsible for making it disappear is the exact same person who is now in danger of being exposed because of Ween's decision to hand over that gun. Think about the impossible position this creates for Rip specifically. If Sheriff Wade starts pulling on this thread with any real seriousness, if he starts asking the kind of deeper questions that a murder weapon demands be asked, that investigation is not going to stop conveniently at Rob Will's doorstep. It is going to lead directly and inevitably back to Rip. Because an investigation into who buried a body is an investigation that someone has to answer for. And Rip has spent this entire season trying to secure justice for Wes, while simultaneously being the one person whose actions have actively obstructed that justice from ever being fully realized. That is an impossible position for anyone to occupy. That is a contradiction that cannot survive contact with a competent investigation. The moment Ween handed that gun to Sheriff Wade, he did not just put Rob Will in danger. He put Rip in exactly the same kind of danger. Whether that was ever his intention or not, whether he even fully considered what his actions might mean for the man working underneath the person he was trying to take down, Rip is now exposed in a way he was not exposed before. A man who spent years protecting this family from consequences is about to face consequences himself. And those consequences are going to come from a direction he probably never anticipated. Because Ween was not thinking about Rip when he walked into that office. Ween was thinking about his own betrayal. He was thinking about years of sacrifice that got rejected in front of an entire room of witnesses. He was thinking about Rob Will choosing violence over loyalty, about choosing blood over service. And in his moment of clarity, in his moment of deciding that staying silent was no longer worth anything, he set into motion something that he may not have fully understood would destroy more than just one person's life. But there is another problem sitting underneath all of this, and it may end up mattering even more than the missing body does. There is an eyewitness problem. The only person who actually witnessed what happened to Wes, the only person who could place Rob Will at the scene and confirm precisely how the murder unfolded, was Chad. Chad saw everything. Chad knew exactly what happened in that moment. Chad was the one person who could have provided the testimony that would have transformed Sheriff Wade's suspicion into absolute certainty. But Chad is dead. He was killed in the very confrontation that set this entire chain of events into motion in the first place. He is gone. And his death was not an accident. It was a consequence. It was a result of the same violence that created this entire situation to begin with. Without an eyewitness and without a body, Sheriff Wade is left with a gun and a strong and justified suspicion about who pulled the trigger. But suspicion is not proof. Suspicion is not enough to make an arrest stick in any meaningful or lasting way. Suspicion might be enough to bring Rob Will in for questioning. It might be enough to apply pressure and see what kind of mistakes a guilty man might make when he is suddenly confronted with evidence he did not expect to surface. But suspicion alone does not survive a competent defense. Suspicion alone does not secure a conviction. That gap between suspicion and proof, that space between what Sheriff Wade knows and what Sheriff Wade can actually prove, is going to define everything about how the remainder of this season unfolds. It is the exact gap that determines whether what Ween just did becomes the moment that finally delivers justice for a murdered man, or simply the moment that exposes everyone connected to this killing to a danger none of them are fully prepared for. Because here is what most people celebrating Rob Will's potential downfall are not fully processing yet. This situation is about to become far more complicated than anyone expected. Sheriff Wade now possesses a murder weapon. But a murder weapon without a body, without an eyewitness, without the kind of forensic evidence that actually survives legal scrutiny, is a weapon that might not be enough to accomplish what everyone thinks it is going to accomplish. Rob Will might not go to prison. Rob Will might not face the consequences that he finally deserves. And in the process of failing to deliver that justice, this investigation might destroy the one person who has spent this entire season trying to make sure that justice actually happened in the first place. So ask yourself this question very carefully. If Ween's revenge against Rob Will accidentally exposes the role that Rip played in making Wes's body disappear, if an investigation into the gun leads directly back to the man who buried the evidence, does justice for a murdered man actually save anyone in this story? Or does it simply guarantee that the person who most deserves to face consequences gets away clean while the person who tried to help him finally face those consequences, destroys his own life in the process?